Welcome to the CPTM Smart Partners Hub. Today is 18th of September 2018, and today we have a very great pleasure to welcome again one of the CPTM Smart Partner to whom we owe, without having planned, we owe the refocusing in the last 4 years or more of the financial inclusion, to start with, on the digital landscape, and specifically to start with Bitcoin and blockchain. And this is Carl Miller, and Carl Miller is most well known in the networks in the CPTM context, in the Smart Partnership movement. He's working in Demos, but he's done a number of things and shared with, together with his colleagues, shared with our groups who are quite influential in their own national context, regions and global, if one is referring to some of the leaders that are particularly interested in this area. And well, he was able about a year ago, Carl, to join us in our initiative, which focused on spotting signals in real time for tomorrow, and which was a new initiative particularly to do with the complexity of the time that is and activities that are taking place nationally, globally and regionally. He told us that he's on the point to publish a book, and since October last year we have been almost every other day checking to see if his book is published. Now here is the book. The book is The Death of Gods and the New Global Power Grab, which has been published, and about which Carl is going to tell us a bit more, and then we will entertain a discussion as relevant to our gods. Mm-hmm. But Carl, just explain a little bit about your background so that people put in the context the book.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me here. Hello, everyone. So, as Maheda said, I'm Carl, and I've been working for best part of a decade now as a think tanker in the UK, essentially focused on the kind of intersection between society and technology, and trying to understand how society and politics and the law and so on are being influenced by tech and different kinds of tech.
Okay.
It's always, I think, been my job really to kind of look as far out as possible and try and bring kind of emerging trends and key patterns onto the table in front of policymakers and decision makers, and that's what I was doing 4 years ago when I came here to talk about blockchain.
Yeah.
It was to kind of try and identify a really, really important trend that I saw and then try and highlight it.
Which was just emerging.
Which was just emerging at that point, and was still quite kind of subterranean and hidden in many ways, and it was to kind of put that in front of central bank governors and other key decision makers and say this is a really big problem. Well, in many ways the book is another attempt at doing exactly that. It's about trying to find what I now think is the most important trend which is currently happening, and then actually coming to places like CPTM to say this is, I think, something which every policymaker in the world needs to start thinking about. And the trend this time isn't blockchain per se, it's power and how it's changing. So the point of the book was to really try and spend a year travelling around the world trying to understand how power was shifting in every single aspect of our life that I could possibly understand. So politics, of course, but also media, warfare, kind of crime, culture.
Including the definition of power itself.
Including the definition of power itself. So not only who holds it, but what power actually is. And the book ended up being called The Death of the Gods, because I think the kind of key trend that I saw happening was that in each of these different places that you actually looked, that there was the same shift, and that was that power was kind of flowing away from the kind of institutions and organisations and people that we typically think are powerful, the gods that we typically think shape our lives, and instead it was flowing into all these new areas or into all these strange new configurations. So I found the kind of political mainstream besieged. I think that the police around the world are going through the worst crisis of law enforcement in the history of modern policing. Mainstream media is being badly undercut.
Actually, the definition of police again, or how you define police and how you implement police.
Exactly, even what police are, but certainly what police can do is being tremendously undermined by the growth of digital technology. Warfare too, there's a huge shift towards fighting war with information, and that was causing a huge shift in power. And we could talk about any of those areas, and I'd love to.
Yeah.
But I think the kind of overall point, and if there's one thing that everyone watching this at some point maybe could take away, it's this. Power has drastically shifted, and as it's shifted, I think it's broken out of the kind of cages that we've always tried to build for power. So when I kind of set out, kind of my editor kind of gave me this question. He said, are we living through a time of more liberation or more control than ever before? And as I kind of went through this journey, as I went, across the world trying to understand power, I kind of realised that I couldn't answer that question. There seemed to be both more liberation and more control than ever before. They both seemed to be happening in greater quantity side by side. And I kind of realised at last that was the kind of nature of the digital revolution, really, an onrush, an onset of both liberation and control. And that was exactly because all the frameworks that have tried to constrain and control power, that have kind of controlled how I can shape your life and how you can shape mine, they've all begun to dissolve.
So it's more or less a distributed and pervasive.
Sometimes pervasive and constant, but sometimes very concentrated, and both.
No, it is both.
Both
more and more centralized, or that is a dilemma. Is centralized and decentralized at the same time.
Right, and sometimes in exactly the same area, and sometimes at exactly the same moment, and that's what's confusing too. But whether it's centralizing or dispersing, and whether it's being used for good or for bad, but for sure power is being used for both in it too. It's far less rule bound than ever before. So the regulations, norms, the law itself, public scrutiny, professional standards, all these things which we've always tried to control power with, they are being undermined again and again and again and again all over the world. That's the big message. Power is broken loose.
So if power is broken loose, which is very good, what does that mean? I mean, do you think, do you end up with, or is there an optimistic kind of message somewhere? Is there a hope somewhere? Or does it show the limits to power? If I were to use the Club of Rome's mantra, limits to
power.
Yes, limits to governance. I think it's limits to power, as we know it, I suppose.
I think it means two things. Right now, I think it means that political systems, political leaders, banks, legislative bodies are far less powerful than they have been at any point during our lives. Their capacity to actually control what happens within their own borders, what happens to their own citizens, is diminishing day by day. Like, if we can dwell on crime for a second, crime on the internet, like everything on the internet, passes across borders unbelievably easily. And what I've seen, and I spent quite a lot of time with the police during this book, and went on a cybercrime raid with them, is that time and time and time again you hear the same thing when you work with the police, and that is that the evidence is in one country, the perpetrators are in another, the victims are in a third, and police simply can't reach through those borders and actually bring perpetrators to justice. And that means that the capacity of the police in the UK or anywhere else in the world to actually enforce what the law says should be enforced is radically diminishing. Alongside that, you've got the rise in all these new power centres that are kind of in many ways like challenging the capacity of states and political bodies to actually in another way control what happens in their own borders. So if you go to DEF CON every year, that happens in Las Vegas, you know, huge gathering, tens of thousands of the world's best hackers will get there. You can see the kind of things that hackers are now capable of actually doing. I saw one man on stage stand up and say that he could hack a laptop not connected to the internet with light. Then he did it with light you couldn't see. Then he did it with sound. Then he did it with sound you couldn't hear.
Right.
He then found a way of exfiltrating data out of the laptop, again, without it being connected to the internet. Another man stood up and proved that he could cause any wind turbine in the world to burst into flames.
Right.
So hackers have risen to be a new power elite, unbelievably powerful.
Why do they do it? Are they aware about power, or is it because they can do it?
I think hackers are very different. As they are a community, and they kind of sit on both sides of the law.
Yeah.
So there are both hackers within law enforcement agencies, and there are hackers that are criminals, and there are plenty of hackers that are in between.
Yes,
But yeah, often I think it is the sense of power. They call it ownage.
They
Hacker
call it
lingo.
ownage, yes.
And that's about owning a device.
Yeah,
it's about
yes,
owning a process. It means about them wresting control of your computer away from you.
Identity and so on.
A lot of identity, a lot of kind of a lot of it is about reputation within their own field.
It's less about material.
Although some of them have got unbelievably rich.
Yes, but it's not as much. I mean, they get rich, but it's not promoted as the main reason why they do it.
Yeah, it's often about prowess. It's about kind of triumphing over a really difficult problem.
Yes. And that means that, I mean, have you been in some of the African or Asian countries, developing or emerging countries, or Caribbean?
I spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe, so I spent quite a lot of time in Kosovo.
Yeah. Because you can see the pride of being a hacker, and it's a confusion about which side you are and so on, very much in Swaziland. Lesotho,
Well, same as in Kosovo, where in not a hacker actually, but a fake news merchant.
What is a hacker? How would you define a hacker? When you took on the central bank governors, you would have introduced them to what is a hacker, which they hear all the time. But
a hacker is a mindset. It's a particular series of values and a way of trying to solve problems, which is all about trying to pull technology apart, never allow technology to be mysterious, to understand how it works, and then to kind of build your technical skills to be able to exert some kind of, as we just said, ownership or mastery over that technology. But it's also to revel in the kind of glorious fun of it. It's not necessarily for the profit, and it's not necessarily for any particular purpose. The first hackers, actually, I met one of them in MIT. They started in a model railway club in MIT. They were the first ever people in the world in the kind of late 50s and 60s to get their hands on computers. The first people to do hands-on computing. And they kind of realised that they could make this computer do amazing things. And they made it sing kind of Gilbert and Sullivan operettas. They taught it how to play chess. They made the first video game. And all of that was just about kind of learning how to master the computer. Not for money, not not even necessarily for power, but just for the actual sheer thrill of it itself.
So what I was trying to say to ask you is the emergence of this type of individuals, because they are individuals, they are not institutions. Yeah, they are networks, communities. Yeah, they emerge in a global context. They don't have boundaries. They don't have they are not national context. They are kind of global, one would say.
That's right. Yeah.
So there is no boundary, and
there's no boundary, and they come everywhere.
Yeah.
But that's also a really interesting observation about them being individuals.
Yes.
And actually, when I launched the book in Parliament, that was one of the first kind of responses that I had to it, which I hadn't actually thought that much about, was that most of the things in the book that I describe as being made less powerful are organisations.
Yes, that's it.
They're political parties
Yeah.
or police forces or regulatory bodies or so on. Most of the people that I point to the book as becoming more powerful are individuals or small groups. And I hadn't quite reflected on that at the time, but I actually think there's a big truth
It's
in that.
very important.
Yeah, a lot of the people that are grasping power, and they don't necessarily have to be hackers or cyber criminals. You could also include digital democrats. You can include citizen journalists. You could include all kinds of different activists that in many ways are kind of grasping power in new ways. But all of them are small, very agile, very fast-moving network of networks.
Yeah,
They're not in these large hierarchical organisations which have very large scale and typically have been the ones which have shaped the world.
I think what we found more and more difficult to kind of accept are some of these policy initiatives connected with supporting startups. In fact, you don't support a startup is an individual who happened to be at the right time, right place. We have a number of them right now. There is one in Tanzania nobody is guiding her, but she seems to make an extraordinary impact day by day, actually. And actually, the issue would be more of scaling up, not start up. And this scaling on and networks is an issue usually, because that's one of the problem to do with networks.
Yeah.
Because you don't quite know, can you scale up? Because if you put a number of these powerful, as we define, individuals, yeah, who are kind of wish to, and they master the technology, if you put them together, or if you were to scale up the kind of things they can do,
Yeah.
or then probably one would master a new.
Well, this is the big problem: is how on earth do you change the way that the organisations currently work that we
Yes,
have in order to be
it.
quick enough and agile enough in the future? And I you know, there are lots of in the book. There's lots of kind of good news stories. Like there's plenty of places where I think actually the internet is and people that use it bestow tremendous good. But I am actually really worried, and one of the reasons I wrote it was actually as a warning to, I think, probably plenty of the people listening to this, which is that the kind of legitimacy of our institutions as they stand are really, really, really being undermined.
I mean, there are so many demonstrations and so much evidence, real-time evidence of smart partners as individuals being part of institutions which, even if they are new, by the time they are set up, they are outdated. And everybody's working not against it, yeah, but to make that institution work. You don't work through the rules that you set up, which you agreed with, and there was a consensus that this is how it should work.
Yeah.
So it's in fact the whole smart partnership ethos was by the way of focusing a number of years ago, to Dr. Mahathir and all the various leaders, yeah, focusing on individuals within institutions not being able to keep up with not just technology, but with the dynamics.
And that's the great challenge for all the members
so
of
there is a power. So the power is.
But they've got
misled.
to bring that. They've got to bring that back with them. So the great challenge for everyone that's part of the smart partnership and the network is to work out how they can go back to the organisations and institutions that they're actually members of and change them.
That's right.
Because the difficulty in all of this, you've already alluded to it, Mihaela, is speed. How do we move quickly enough now? Because power is changing as quickly as the technology that it flows through, and it's never going to slow down. It's only going to speed up. And everything, whether it's the police, whether it's the way in which we make law, whether it's the way that we draft and update regulation, none of that is moving quickly enough at the moment. And that's the reason, really, that as I said, power's breaking out of its cage. because power has changed and the cages have stayed the same. So the nature of monopoly has changed,
Yes.
but monopoly law has stayed the same. The way in which we get value out of the economy through data and analytics has changed, but the laws which actually govern economic activity have stayed the same. Crime has changed, but the police force hasn't changed. The need for a whole new raft of legislation has emerged within the blink of an eye. You know, what can you say on social media, hate crime, and all the rest of it, and the law just can't keep up. Everywhere, you know, newspapers, business models have been completely demolished, and people are consuming their news digitally, and yet the newspapers can't change quickly enough. So everywhere you look, there's this disjuncture between like what is actually happening, what is valuable, what is powerful, and how and what organisations actually, how they're structured, what laws are in place, and how power is controlled. So the huge thing, I think, really, that people need to start thinking about, and I think maybe even this network should think about and kind of lead the way in, is how do we build cages quickly enough again? How do we re-cage power?
Yes.
How do we pass regulation, legislation, professional standards in general? How do these things actually happen now with the speed that we need? And maybe there are a whole new kinds of cages that we need too, that we haven't actually thought up yet.
But do we need, I mean, okay, one would say, do we need cages? Probably we need new cages, even if they are virtual cages, even if cages might be algorithms of one kind.
Right, maybe they're technological.
Yes.
Sometimes maybe they look a bit like older cages, and maybe sometimes they have to be completely new. But let me give you one more example. So professional standards. Yeah, this is obviously really important, and
very much.
You know, and plenty of the people that I know are part of the network would be, you know, accountants or lawyers or doctors, people or academics, scientists, and each of them have their own professional standards and their own bodies which regulate like what they do and can punish them if they break those rules. There is the amount of regulation that's currently incumbent on a tech giant worker when they build their platforms is less than the regulation that you need to make a colouring pencil. Like there is no professional standards whatsoever. When you are sculpting the algorithms which are central to our social and political lives. I mean, it's astonishing to me. And maybe that means we need a new professional body. Maybe we need a Royal College of Algorithmists.
There's something like this, we were discussing during the central bank governors, which, as I said, currently they are dealing with governance issues in a national context, not just the central bank. And this is one transformation that is happening, but nobody dares to the central banks, to the governors of central banks. They are well beyond just doing their own usual function. There is something more they are doing, but there isn't any way to articulate what is it that they can do and with whom to gauge. So what they were looking at, they were discussing about, do we need a new Machiavelli? And you mentioned here.
Yes, Machiavelli, I did.
Or, in fact, when I remember from Namibia, the deputy governor of, the former deputy prime minister, Hausiku, who is kind of breathing and articulating smart partnership since he was born, probably, just intuitively kind of articulating how things should happen. He was quite impressed about the fact that there is some sort of centralization emerging, but he was saying, is there a new Marx emerging? And again, when I looked the other day, waiting for you to come today, I've seen that you were also mentioning that. I mean, this is really, there is evidence of people thinking and feeling and not having where to articulate some of
right. We don't even. Yeah, you're right. I mean, including me, are kind of looking back at the grand theories of the last industrial revolution in order to try and explain this one. And I was surprised at myself, but I did pick up Marx and dust it off.
You'll be surprised how many young ones, 29ers, that are in Uganda or wherever, they are preoccupied of looking at Marx, knowing that it's 2018 today. But because there is no other point of reference.
I certainly think for the especially to understand the tech giants, I think Marx
Yes.
is actually quite helpful
Yes,
because
yes.
you know Marx obviously talks a lot about the kind of inexorable agglomeration of capital into greater and greater piles until essentially the kind of market eats itself. And whilst we haven't quite got to that point yet, we definitely have seen in the tech giants a kind of a very
you
powerful
mentioned
new
that.
centralising force, central gravity. This kind of combination of data and platforms that each tech giant in one way or another has actually created, you know, is pulling in more and more capital to a central place. And so I think I was looking at Marx really, and that's in the business chapter in the book, to try and understand what will happen. So are we going to see just a huge market failure? Are we going to see a political crisis as these very large kind of centres of gravity are broken up? Or are we going to see another kind of technological disruption, decentralisation, come in to actually begin to reverse that trend?
You go through the business, you don't go through the economics as such, you go through politics. And you go to crime, people as such, but the economics you've been less emphasizing as single out.
Yeah, I mean, the economics is kind of
This is
woven
common.
into all the others.
Yeah.
So in politics, it's about the interaction of politics and money. There's a lot of economics in the business section.
Yeah.
Because there in the business section, really, I basically sketch out what I regard to be the kind of great struggle that's happening at the moment, and that's between centralisation and decentralisation. It seems there are two enormously important trends that digital tech has awoken that are running side by side. The one is what we've just spoken about, really. It's these new centres of gravity, these kind of these tech giants that have platforms and scales of data that it's simply impossible to compete against now. And they seem to be pulling more and more talent and more money into central places. And if everyone that's been to any of the campuses that they have in Silicon Valley will know the kind of sheer, unbelievable scale of these companies
suppose
now.
you don't need to go to Silicon Valley.
No, to see.
You just go to Google Camp or wherever it is, and you realize very quickly, or Amazon, whatever it is.
Just amazing, unbelievable. But then you've got decentralisation, and that's happening too.
Yes.
And that's roughly of the same economic scale as the tech giants. And that's really interesting, is that in a sense, like, all these billions and the kind of future structure of the economy itself is in many ways coming down to a question of systems engineering. Like, do the pipes actually point into the middle, or do the pipes point out to the outside?
Actually, I was very much into engineering, industrial automation, cybernetics and all that. And I was thinking that neither of those things are useful enough to understand when things will go. There is something different, and quite a lot was made reference to complexity and so on, and in Singapore and wherever else new Santa Fe's emerged and whatever. But I don't think they can cope with this type of almost organic, biological, or almost life, because I liked what you ended up with, or it was an interlude, I think, life and death of this. Because it's a birth and death, isn't it, of things.
Yeah, you could also almost see them as epidemiological phenomena.
Yes.
Kind of different kinds of organism competing in this kind of grand scale.
Who are the new gods then?
So
you're ending up there.
Yeah, so the new gods are this whole pantheon of newly empowered actor that are replacing the old, and you meet them all as you go through the book. Some are good, some are bad. So you'll meet Elliot Higgins, who's a citizen journalist that went from the comment threads of The Guardian to the front page of the New York Times. There's Audrey Tang, who went from being a high school dropout to the digital minister of Taiwan, who's reforming politics there. The hackers certainly are new gods, as are the tech giants, wrestling with a whole new, other kind of new god, which are all these decentralised platforms. Cyber criminals are certainly new gods. Information warfare officers are new gods. Each of them really are people that have found new routes to power. like they've seen opportunities literally at their fingertips in many cases, and have reached through the internet to be able to reach all of us, and are shaping our lives in ways that were simply not possible to do before. I met many of the new gods face to face because really, in many ways, I think understanding both these trends and understanding power is really about understanding people.
Yes. Yes.
And I think often we focus just on the technology alone and what it can do, and we forget actually that technology is a creature that is kind of created and managed and only given life through the human beings that surround it.
Well, I mean a likely advance of computing with algorithms and everything else is unlikely to be anybody to make an intervention into it, to stop, so to speak. And there are extraordinary positive opportunities, but they happen at the same time with inability of the current political structures that we have to not just look at the risks and the negative parts of it, because the reaction of the structures, you don't know if it is because of the negative impacts of technology or it's because they are afraid they lose power. And my view is that is mainly that they are afraid they lose power and they cannot control. So this is what you can see from observing in the last 6 years or so the central bank governors who are at the highest level kind of semi-independent individuals with their gods, more or less. They are example of real gods in the older context, but they are trying to get a new function by the way of the new technology that they have to stop, because they don't quite know the cryptocurrencies and all, they don't quite know how to regulate them. We thought that probably again we're likely to focus quite a lot on data visualization, because we don't quite know how to visualize now the kind of network of networks that are taking place. A few years ago, a number of years ago, we started the buckyball, this one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. There was a demonstration of what means a network and a transparent globe and how things move. Now that is no more just a network, it's a network of networks. But you don't quite know what effect it has, network of networks. And we were trying to focus on, in the next 2 years, 2018-2020, on networks of networks within about 10 countries, emerging countries, but where already they've got these insights in the last few years of central bank governors, national statistics offices, National Bureau of Standards, common denominator data, and anything that comes with that in finance or wherever, statistics or wherever it is, and interfacing with heads of government leaders, real political leaders. So this will be in the next 2 years. Now, the next 2 years, a lot of developments will take place, and a kind of everybody's saying, do we have a plan? I said, no, we don't. We have a framework, and we have spotting signals at every point of time. But, and yes, there are approaches that will continue to do in national context, but it's unlikely that you're going to know what is going to be the outcome, except sharing some lessons out of it. So that's very much connected to a new framework for national visioning processes. So your particular reflections are the new global power grab could also be kind of the new national power grab. If you consider there is a national visioning still possible to take place. And I suppose it could in the next 2 years. We don't know after that.
Well, states will have to change a lot in order to survive.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, I think the trends are really so deep and so serious that it's possible that perhaps not in 2 years, but certainly within a lifetime, we could see the kind of nation state beginning to be kind of like begin to dissolve and certainly not be the kind of premier unit of political organisation in the world.
Mm-hmm. So I suppose the things that you discovered that you could look more in depth next after this book or because of this book you put together.
Yeah.
What are they?
I think
because it's the most relevant.
Yeah,
the most relevant.
In a sense, the book's the warning.
Yes, it's a warning. Yeah.
The book's the warning, and I think it's my responsibility to now probably try and do two things. Mm-hmm. First, it would be to put together a kind of a practical series of suggestions and advice for the individual. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important for us all to know what we do about this. What do we do when cybercrime is increasing so rapidly? How can we become involved in politics in new ways, given the ways I think it's opening up?
Or media.
Or media. How do we become citizen journalists? How do we grasp these opportunities?
The professional standards, the professional.
Well, this is
the new profession, that is probably very.
And that's the other thing. So I think both I would like to put together a series of like instructions and advice for individuals, but then also I think I'd like to try and sketch out what I think these new cages for power actually look like, and how do we build them, and how do we keep them updated quickly enough.
It would be very good if you were to be part of our interactions in the next 2 years to pick up and elicit evidence for the new reflections.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I'm not saying that I'm ever going to have all these answers myself.
No, of course, no.
No, I mean more my. No. I mean, really, what I'm just trying to do is to say that this is a conversation that we all, in terms of how do we control power, professional standards, regulation, the rest of it. This is a conversation we all badly need to start having.
Okay, so where did you launch this book? Up to now, it's about a month or so.
It's about a month.
Yeah. So you mentioned Parliament.
Yes, it was launched in Parliament, and since then in the Sunday Times, and the Times Literary Supplement.
I think we've seen that. We have the Sunday Times there.
And
elsewhere. I mean, we launched it here as soon as you heard it was launched.
Great.
We kind of in our weekly, and we're going to continue to do so, but. What we wanted was to be connected with the context of those individuals in those networks, so that they reflect within their own network about the power shift, and how they can do something about, or might be tempted to do something, or they are legitimate to do something.
Right,
because most of the time they don't feel legitimate.
And that's one of the main questions now is how, because obviously like any survey of power across the world is unbelievably broad.
Yes.
Especially when digital technology itself is increasingly everywhere too. So the main thing I'm trying to do now, I think, and need help with, is to reflect and work out how these very general rules and patterns kind of play out in each individual context. Whether it's a geographic one or a thematic one, where across the world and across all the different landscapes of power, I suppose.
What would be the objective?
In many ways, probably diagnosis and cure. So to diagnose in what ways power is now operating differently to the way it was before, what damage and harm that can be doing. And then how we have to respond as experts, bankers, legislators, or holders of political office, or just as individuals, to that.
Yeah. What attracted me when I've seen it already published was also what I was doing on behalf of our group, and having finished with central bank governors and all sorts of other things, Commonwealth Summit, which was in itself an example of grabbing or otherwise losing power, was that more or less you could call it a manifesto of a kind, or towards a manifesto.
So it's maybe perhaps towards
It's
one.
towards a, no, not a manifesto, towards a manifesto, sorry. Why I said so? Because I was preoccupied to kind of reflect with the Smart Partners on the Smart Partnership Movement's manifesto, which came about without anyone literally being aware that there are some principles that we are following. They were articulated by President Uyoma at that time, together with all the others. And I was asked, together with two colleagues, put them down before we lose them, as we said it. And then we added, as we reflected, as it evolved, as it happened. And we have now a living manifesto, the story so far. And that's the one which I would like to... It happened at the same time when eventually, finally, your book was published.
Eventually, yeah.
And it's a pity that it was, because I could have mentioned or pick up some of your things related to power. But as I said, this is a living manifesto, the story so far. So when you say a manifesto, it looks thick, quite, yeah? Of course, it's better on the digital, but it has actually only about 3 pages which are relevant. It started like that, with the principles of Smart Partnership. And I was wondering that it was just launched almost at the end of August, and to all the heads of government and all the Smart Partners. And of course, that will evolve, particularly in relation to this new cooperative framework for leveraging value of data, the Smart Partnership way and way ahead. Yeah?
Yeah.
But it's nothing like
as long as
the
my
courage,
book is.
the courage that you had to publish a book which is towards a manifesto about the new global power grab. And I think towards a manifesto would be quite interesting for you to put it into a few pages, what we were talking about, because most will be picked up as a basis, the book, with all your evidence of interviews, which is extraordinary, varied, and enormously. You must have worked and enjoyed it at the same time.
Oh, good.
Yes, but like towards a manifesto, some of the things we just talked about would be terribly useful, and well, of course, they will be picked up very quickly by our Smart Partners, but they are in most of the 50 countries or so, and beyond, in US also, not necessarily Commonwealth, but particularly in the program that we're likely to develop. Okay, so I think the foreign affairs, I've seen that they've been this week publishing something about the World War Web. I suppose I could see on the front page something about the power grab, the new...
Well, you never know.
I could see that.
You never know.
And so many other things. I mean, the OECD, there is a lot of interest in the issue of power and new type of definition of power and what that is.
Well, I mean, that's
so
great.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
And
yeah, I just hope that a few people read it. Really.
Part of developing. Yes, I'm sure that they will. But yeah, will be part of continuing to spread your message.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you.